The first contact happened on a Tuesday morning when Dr. Sarah Chun received a signal from deep space that changed everything. The message was clear, direct, and absolutely terrifying. A massive alien fleet was heading toward Earth, and they would arrive in 90 days. The United Nations quickly gathered all world leaders in an emergency session. General Marcus Rodriguez sat at the conference table, watching as diplomats from different nations argued about how to respond. Some wanted to surrender immediately. Others suggested sending a peaceful delegation. Most importantly, several nations proposed complete military stand-down to show that humans were not aggressive creatures. The alien species called themselves the Valorians, and they had been studying human civilization for decades. Their scientists concluded that humans were fundamentally peaceful beings who had developed warfare only out of necessity. They believed that once faced with a superior force, humans would surrender without fight because their DNA was coded for cooperation, not conflict. The aliens had never encountered a truly violent species before, and they found the idea of human warfare to be primitive and inefficient. News channels across the world reported this analysis. Newspapers printed headlines like, "Aliens believe we are peace-loving," and "Surrender recommended by Global Council." The narrative spread quickly that humanity should prove these aliens right. Nobody wanted to be seen as the aggressive species that refused peaceful coexistence. Countries began dismantling military bases and sending their soldiers home. Nuclear arsenals were shut down. Fighter jets were grounded. Sarah watched this unfold from her laboratory with growing concern. She had studied the Valorian transmissions carefully, analyzing their language, their culture, and their intentions. What the world leaders failed to understand was that the Valorians were not coming in peace. Their message about human peace-loving nature was actually a calculated strategy. They believed that if humans truly were peaceful, then removing their ability to fight was simple. They were not offering friendship. They were offering surrender, and they expected humanity to accept it quietly. The Valorian fleet was massive, consisting of 3,000 ships. Their weapons technology was advanced beyond anything Earth had developed. Their ships could vaporize continents with single strikes. They had conquered 17 other civilizations, and every single one had surrendered when shown the overwhelming force. The Valorians were certain that humanity would be no different. In the remaining days before arrival, a strange calm settled over Earth. Some people were hopeful that peace was finally coming. Others were terrified but resigned to their fate. Military personnel received orders to stand down and not engage unless directly attacked. Weapons were secured and locked away. Emergency protocols were established to facilitate quick surrender once the Valorians arrived. Sarah tried to warn the government. She prepared reports, made presentations, and sent urgent messages to every official who would listen. She explained that the Valorians were manipulating human nature against itself. They were using the human desire for peace as a weapon. By convincing humanity that fighting was wrong, the Valorians had essentially disarmed the planet without firing a single shot. Nobody listened. The world wanted to believe that this was the beginning of a new era. Media outlets celebrated the coming of superior beings who would guide humanity toward enlightenment. Religious leaders spoke of miracles and divine intervention. Scientists prepared to share knowledge with an advanced civilization. Sarah's warnings were dismissed as paranoia and fear-mongering. News outlets attacked her credibility. She was removed from her position at the space agency. Some even called her dangerous for suggesting that humanity should prepare for war. The narrative of peaceful coexistence was too appealing, too emotionally satisfying. People wanted to believe that their species had evolved beyond violence. But Sarah was not someone who gave up easily. She continued her work in secret, analyzing every piece of information about the Valorians. She discovered something disturbing in their transmissions. The Valorians did not view the species they conquered as individuals. They viewed them as resources. Some were enslaved, working in mines and factories. Others were used for biological experimentation. A few were simply eliminated because they were deemed inefficient. The Valorians had successfully conquered every civilization they encountered because all those civilizations had chosen surrender over resistance. None had possessed the will to fight an overwhelming force. The Valorians had grown comfortable with this pattern. They did not expect resistance. They did not prepare for it. Their military was designed for absolute dominance, not survival against desperate enemies. Sarah made a decision that night. She would not allow humanity to go quietly into chains. She reached out to military commanders who still had access to weapons. She contacted scientists in secret research facilities. She compiled everything she knew about Valerian technology and strategy. She prepared detailed plans for how humanity could fight back, how they could use their ingenuity and desperation to turn the tables. It was dangerous work. She risked arrest, execution, and being labeled a traitor to the new world order that was supposedly coming. But Sarah understood something that most of the world had forgotten. Humans were not inherently peaceful. Humans were survivors. Throughout their history, they had faced impossible odds and found ways to win. They had climbed to the top of their world through cunning, innovation, and an incredible ability to adapt to any situation. The Valorians did not understand human nature at all. They had made a critical error in their analysis. Humans did not fear war because they were peaceful. Humans feared war because they understood its costs. But when faced with extinction, with slavery, with the loss of their freedom and their future, humans would do whatever was necessary. They would become something terrifying. They would unleash capabilities that most civilizations found unthinkable. As Sarah waited for the Valerian fleet to arrive, she felt a grim determination settle into her bones. The world had convinced itself that the coming of the Valorians was a moment of destiny, of transcendence into a new age. Sarah knew the truth. It was going to be a moment of reckoning. The Valorians had made a fatal mistake. They had given humanity time to think, time to prepare, time to accept what was coming. And humans, when they finally accepted reality, were capable of becoming absolutely unstoppable. The countdown clock on her screen showed 30 days remaining. Sarah made her final preparations and waited for humanity's true nature to emerge from the darkness. The Valerian fleet arrived exactly on schedule. Massive ship formations appeared above every major city on Earth simultaneously. The largest vessel, a structure so enormous it blocked out the sun over North America, began transmitting its demands. Humanity would submit to Valerian rule. All military resistance was futile. Surrender now, and the transition would be peaceful. Resistance would result in systematic destruction until nothing remained but obedient survivors. The world fell into chaos. Some nations immediately began broadcasting surrender messages. Others attempted to negotiate through diplomatic channels. Religious organizations held massive prayer services. Military installations, which had been dismantled for peace, remained dormant and lifeless. Everything was proceeding exactly as the Valorians had predicted. What the Valorians did not know was that humanity had prepared differently than any civilization they had ever encountered. Deep beneath the earth, in bunkers hidden from every satellite and sensor the Valorians possessed, humanity's true military capability had been assembled. General Rodriguez had moved an enormous portion of the planet's weapons into deep underground facilities months ago. Scientists had worked around the clock to develop new technologies, weapons that leveraged human creativity and innovation. Sarah's warnings had found their way to people who still carried the old instincts of defense and survival. The world had not been completely disarmed. Instead, humanity had hidden its claws, waiting patiently for the moment when they would need to strike. When the Valerian demand came, the response was coordinated and immediate. Every nation that had secretly maintained military capability received the signal. Submarines that had been hidden in ocean depths rose to the surface. Underground launch facilities powered up. Soldiers who had never actually left their bases, who had only pretended to disband, began mobilizing. A hidden network of weapons factories, disguised as peaceful manufacturing plants, suddenly shifted into full military production. The Valorians detected these movements almost immediately, but by then it was too late for a simple preventative strike. Humanity launched everything simultaneously. Missiles filled the sky. Kinetic weapons powered by nuclear reactors streaked toward the alien fleet. Electromagnetic pulses disrupted Valerian communications. Coordinated cyber attacks, designed specifically for this moment, crashed Valerian defense systems. The first wave of the offensive was devastating. Humanity had studied the Valerian technology extensively through their transmissions. They understood its strengths and, more importantly, its weaknesses. The Valerian shields were powerful but required constant energy input from their main reactors. The Valerian weapons were devastating, but slow to reload compared to human ordnance. The Valerian soldiers were individually powerful, but lacked the adaptability that came from millions of years of evolution on a hostile planet. The Valerian commander watched in shock as their orbital defensive grid collapsed under the assault. His advisors screamed contradictory orders. The humans were not supposed to be capable of organized military response. Their technology should have been centuries behind Valerian capability. The supposed peaceful species was waging a war with precision, coordination, and an apparent understanding of exactly where to strike. In the Valerian command ship, the oldest commander in their fleet faced a reality that had never occurred in their military history. Resistance was not theoretical. It was happening. Their fleet was suffering real casualties. Sarah watched the battle from an underground command center, surrounded by screens showing real-time data from military installations across the world. Nations that had been divided for centuries, that had fought each other for resources and ideology, suddenly fought as one unified force. Old enemies coordinated their strikes. Countries that had possessed nuclear weapons for decades finally had a reason to use them that every human could agree upon. The survival of the species transcended all other considerations. The Valerian strategy depended on overwhelming force creating immediate surrender. But humanity did not surrender. Instead, humanity adapted. When one weapon system failed, humans switched to another. When one strategy failed, they immediately shifted tactics. The Valerian commanders found themselves fighting an opponent that seemed to anticipate their moves, that learned from each engagement, and that was willing to accept casualties in pursuit of victory. 3 days into the conflict, the Valerian fleet suffered losses of nearly 30%. It was the first significant defeat in their entire military history. Their soldiers were demoralized. Their commanders were confused. Everything they had been taught about warfare, about dominance, about the inevitable victory of superior force, was being proven wrong. The Valorians attempted to communicate, to negotiate, to impose order through threat of annihilation. They destroyed a city as a demonstration of power. Humanity's response was to intensify the assault. They struck at Valerian fuel sources, at their supply lines, at their ability to sustain their fleet in orbit. Sarah had predicted this perfectly. She understood that humans responded to threats not with surrender, but with determination. Every threat the Valorians made only strengthened human resolve. Every destroyed city meant more soldiers willing to fight. Every casualty meant more of the population engaging in the conflict. The Valorians had inadvertently activated the most dangerous aspect of human nature. Throughout history, humans had been defeated by overwhelming force. But they had never been destroyed. The species that survived ice ages, meteor impacts, and plagues had developed something the Valorians did not possess. Humans had unlimited capacity for resistance when their survival was at stake. They had an ability to organize, to innovate, to accept sacrifice, and to persevere through impossible circumstances. The Valerian fleet attempted to move into new positions, to re-establish dominance through concentrated firepower. But humanity's attacks followed them everywhere. Underground facilities launched missiles that could not be tracked until they were in terminal phase. Submarines released weapons that utilized physics and mathematics in ways the Valorians had not anticipated. As the battle continued, something began to shift in the Valerian command structure. Fear started to replace confidence. For the first time in their existence as a spacefaring civilization, they were losing. Losing not because their opponent had superior technology, but because their opponent had superior will, superior adaptability, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. Sarah received reports that the Valerian fleet was attempting to regroup and form a new defensive perimeter. She studied the data and made a crucial decision. Humanity had been fighting defensively, trying to repel the invasion. But now, Sarah realized, it was time to transition to offensive operations. It was time to stop defending Earth and start taking the war to the Valorians themselves. She transmitted orders to every military commander on the planet. The first phase of the war was complete. The Valerian threat to Earth had been diminished. Now came the second phase. Now humanity would pursue them, hunt them, and ensure that they could never threaten any world again. The species that had conquered 17 civilizations was about to encounter an enemy they could not comprehend, could not defeat, and could not escape from. The Valerian fleet retreated to a defensive position in deep space, attempting to reorganize their forces and reassess their strategy. But humanity did not allow them the luxury of preparation. Human vessels, hastily constructed using captured Valerian technology combined with human engineering, launched from Earth's orbit in pursuit. The chase had begun. What the Valorians discovered was that humans did not wage war the way other civilizations did. Other conquered species had fought with honor, with limitations, with an understanding of acceptable casualties. Humans fought to win. Period. There were no rules, no acceptable limits, no concept of mercy once the conflict had begun. Every resource was mobilized. Every citizen contributed to the war effort. Children worked in factories producing ammunition. Scientists raced to develop new weapons. Economists redirected all commerce toward military production. Sarah coordinated the global military response from her command center. She had become the unofficial leader of humanity's war efforts, the person that nations looked to for strategy and direction. She had spent years studying the Valorians, and now that knowledge became her greatest weapon. She ordered the construction of new types of weapons that the Valorians had never encountered. Humans built swarm drones that used artificial intelligence to hunt Valerian ships. They created weapons that exploited quantum physics in ways that Valerian shielding could not counter. They manufactured stealth bombers that approached the Valerian fleet from unexpected angles. Every innovation, every new idea, every creative solution was immediately implemented and deployed. The Valorians attempted to establish a defensive perimeter, but humanity's strategy was to overwhelm them through constant, unrelenting pressure. There was no negotiation. There was no possibility of surrender that would preserve Valerian lives. Humanity had decided that the threat to Earth could only be eliminated completely. Every Valerian ship needed to be destroyed. Every Valerian soldier needed to be eliminated. There was no other acceptable outcome. The military leaders who had grown comfortable with the idea of a quick, painless war suddenly found themselves facing a complete existential crisis. The Valorians had conquered civilizations across the galaxy, but this was different. Humans did not fight like other species. They did not have a breaking point. They did not value individual lives above the survival of their civilization. They would sacrifice anything, endure anything, do anything necessary to win. In the third week of the offensive, the Valerian fleet suffered a devastating ambush. A human strike force that had been assembled from every nation on Earth coordinated a perfectly timed attack on the Valerian supply convoy. 300 Valerian ships were destroyed. Thousands of Valerian soldiers died. It was a massacre that terrified the Valerian command structure. The Valerian commander made a desperate decision. He would attempt a new strategy. He would destroy Earth completely, eliminating the source of this impossible resistance, and then escape to Valerian space to prepare for a larger conflict. It was a decision made in fear, a decision made by a leader who no longer believed that victory was possible. But Sarah had anticipated this. She had war games running continuously, analyzing every possible Valerian move. When the order to attack Earth came, humanity was ready. The Valorians launched their assault, but it was met by the most powerful human defense ever assembled. Every nation fired every weapon they possessed at once. The sky above Earth became a river of light and fire as missiles and energy weapons destroyed Valerian bombing runs before they could complete their strikes. It was a Pyrrhic victory. Several cities were destroyed. Millions of humans died. But the Valerian assault force was completely annihilated. Humanity had chosen to lose cities rather than lose the war. They had accepted casualties that would have broken any other species, but only strengthened their resolve. The surviving Valerian fleet attempted to escape, but humanity pursued relentlessly. Ships were shot down one after another. The Valorians were trapped between the human fleet ahead and their own lack of fuel and supplies. Their forward observers reported something that the Valerian commander found almost impossible to believe. Humans were willing to chase them across space itself. The Valorians could not escape this enemy. Wherever they ran, wherever they hid, humans would follow. Sarah made a final strategic decision. She organized a unified human assault fleet, drawing ships and personnel from every nation on Earth. This fleet would pursue the Valorians to the edge of known space, if necessary. There would be no rest, no pause, no negotiation. The war would continue until the threat was completely eliminated. The Valerian civilization had unified the entire planet against it through its arrogance. Nations that had fought each other for centuries now fought side by side. Soldiers from different countries, speaking different languages, following different religions, suddenly discovered a unity of purpose. They would defend their world, their species, their future, and they would do it together. Scientists discovered something critical in their study of Valerian technology. The shields that protected Valerian ships could be overloaded if struck simultaneously from multiple angles with specific frequencies. Humans immediately began manufacturing weapons that exploited this weakness. Engineers found that Valerian hull plating, while stronger than human steel, became brittle when exposed to rapid temperature changes. Humans began developing thermal weapons specifically designed to create this effect. Every new piece of information about the Valorians became a weapon. Every weakness was analyzed and exploited. Humanity approached warfare with the same problem-solving mindset that had allowed them to build civilizations, create art, and develop science. War became just another challenge to be solved, and humanity was incredibly good at solving problems. The Valerian fleet was now in full retreat, no longer even attempting to establish defensive lines. Their communication systems had been disrupted. Approximately 60% of their ships had been destroyed. Supplies were running critically low. The soldiers who had arrived believing that they would easily conquer a peaceful species now fought in desperation, knowing that their enemy would follow them to the ends of the galaxy. What the Valorians learned too late was that humans did not fear war because they were peaceful. They feared it because they understood its cost. But when that cost became unavoidable, when the choice was between fighting and extinction, humanity transformed. They became something that evolution had designed them to be. Survivors, hunters, warriors capable of absolute determination and endless adaptation. Sarah watched the reports coming in from the front lines. The human forces were achieving victory after victory. The Valerian civilization, for the first time in their existence, was experiencing systematic defeat. And Sarah knew that this was only the beginning. The war would not end with the destruction of the Valerian fleet. It would end only when humanity had made certain that the Valorians could never threaten any world again. The final confrontation occurred in the Valerian home system, a distance from Earth that should have made human pursuit logistically impossible. But humanity had spent the past months developing faster ships, creating supply chains that spanned the solar system and beyond, and organizing the largest military operation in their entire history. The Valerian homeworld, a jewel of architecture and technology that had been developed over 10,000 years of civilization, was suddenly surrounded by human forces. Sarah coordinated the assault from a command ship that orbited the planet, watching screens that displayed the positions of 3,000 human vessels. Every nation on Earth had contributed to this armada. Young men and women from across the planet, united by a common purpose, manned these ships. The Valerian leadership attempted one final negotiation. They offered surrender, offered technology, offered anything if humans would spare their homeworld. But Sarah had seen the data on what the Valorians had done to 17 other civilizations. She had accessed their records and found documentation of slavery, of experimentation, of systematic genocide. There was no redemption possible. The Valerian civilization had made its choices, and now it would face the consequences. Sarah transmitted the order for the final assault. What happened over the next hours was something that would change human history forever. The human fleet, coordinating through a unified command structure, employed every weapon they had developed and every strategy they had perfected during months of pursuit. Shields that had never been breached crumbled under simultaneous attacks from thousands of directions. The Valerian fleet, smaller now and demoralized, was systematically destroyed. Planetary defenses that had protected the Valerian homeworld for millennia fell before human assault. Not because human technology was superior, but because humans had learned to think like the Valorians, to predict their moves, and to strike at exactly the right moment in exactly the right way. The Valerian civilization, one of the most advanced in the galaxy, ceased to exist in the span of 12 hours. The human forces did not stop there. They orbited Valerian colonies across the system, ensuring that no Valerian stronghold could ever recover. They accessed the Valerian database and extracted information on every location where Valerian forces were stationed. One by one, those locations were targeted and eliminated. It was genocide on a scale that shook the galaxy. The species that the Valorians had believed would be peaceful and submissive had instead become an unstoppable force of absolute destruction. Humanity had not just defended itself. Humanity had eradicated an entire alien civilization. News of what was happening spread through the galaxy with shocking speed. Hundreds of other species watched in horror as humanity executed the complete and total destruction of the Valerian Empire. Some species attempted to protest, to demand that humans show mercy. But humanity had moved beyond the point where such appeals had any effect. The decision had been made. The Valorians had chosen war, and humanity would finish it. As human forces moved to eliminate the final Valerian settlements, the Galactic Council called an emergency session. Species that had existed for millions of years, that had believed themselves untouchable, suddenly realized they were facing something completely unknown. Humanity was not bound by the rules that govern galactic warfare. Humans fought with a totality of purpose that most civilizations found incomprehensible and terrifying. The Valerian commander, the last surviving military leader, was captured trying to flee toward deep space. He was brought before Sarah for questioning. He stared at her with a mixture of desperation and incomprehension. He had led a civilization that had conquered worlds. He had faced species with superior numbers and technological advantages. But nothing had prepared him for what he now understood. "Your analysis was correct," Sarah told him calmly. "Humans do fear war. We understand its costs better than almost any species. We have seen what warfare does to our world, to our families, to our future. That is precisely why we are so absolutely devastating when we finally commit to it. When we choose to go to war, we do not hesitate. We do not negotiate. We do not show mercy. We eliminate the threat completely." The Valerian commander had no response. The arrogance that had guided his civilization's expansion across the galaxy had blinded him to the nature of the species he was confronting. The war was officially declared concluded 97 days after the Valerian fleet first arrived at Earth. What followed was a period of reorganization and reconstruction. Humanity remained armed, vigilant, and absolutely prepared for any threat. The galaxy had learned a critical lesson. The species that other civilizations had mistakenly assessed as peaceful had revealed their true nature. When provoked, when threatened, when facing a choice between freedom and slavery, humans became the most formidable force in known space. Years later, historians would study this period and marvel at humanity's transformation. A species that had been fragmented into hundreds of nations, that had fought among itself for most of its history, had unified completely when facing external threat. Resources had flowed toward military production. Scientists had worked with a dedication that bordered on obsession. Soldiers had followed orders with absolute commitment. Every human, regardless of nationality or background, had contributed to a singular goal. The other galactic species established new protocols for dealing with humans. Special ambassadors were trained. Trade agreements were approached carefully. Military forces that had once prepared for invasion of human space were reassigned. A healthy respect, bordering on fear, developed toward this young species that had destroyed one of the galaxy's greatest civilizations. Sarah returned to Earth as a hero, though she refused the title. She continued her work studying other civilizations, analyzing potential threats, and ensuring that humanity would never be caught unprepared again. But something in the galaxy had changed fundamentally. The universe was now aware that humans were not to be underestimated. In the years that followed, human expansion into space accelerated. Other species offered technology, offered positions in the galactic community, offered anything to ensure that humanity remained satisfied and did not turn its attention toward conquest. Humanity had the opportunity to become what the Valorians had been, to conquer and subjugate other worlds. But humans chose a different path. They remembered the cost of war. They remembered the cities destroyed, the lives lost, the trauma of conflict. They chose instead to build, to explore, to share knowledge with other species. But always, underneath the peaceful intentions, was an unspoken understanding. Humans could wage war with an absolute totality that most galaxies had never witnessed. As Sarah looked out from her office at the stars, she understood something profound about her species. Humans did not fear war because they were peaceful. They feared it because they understood that when released, human potential for destruction became absolute. The Valorians had made their fatal mistake in assuming that peace came from weakness. They did not understand that humanity's restraint was a choice, not a limitation. The message had been sent to the galaxy. Humanity could be peaceful, could be cooperative, could be friends and partners in building a better future. But threaten them, try to enslave them, attempt to conquer them, and you would unleash something that no civilization was prepared to face. The age of human civilization on Earth was over. The age of humanity in the stars had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.